Harry Douglas, not only because I think he was coming along as a slot wide receiver, but the return game that he had become involved in, that's a tough blow to lose a guy like that for the year.
It is, and you mentioned the role as a slot wide receiver. That's huge. You never want to lose a part of your offense, but at first blush, the part that's really going to hurt the Falcons is him as a punt returner. He did such a great job last year taking over for Adam Jennings. You look at his numbers, he only had 19 punt returns, which seems like he had a lot more, but it was because he was so productive with those few returns after he took over, returning one for a touchdown against Carolina and just showing some real flash. So that's probably where the team's going to have to focus on first, is say, okay, where are you going to find that other punt returner? And then, of course, in making moves with receiver, the team signed Robert Ferguson this afternoon to help out in that regard.
And and then you and I were talking off the air, Robert Ferguson, a guy that's been around the league, and kind of the misconception sometimes that you lose a guy, there's nobody that's out there that's signable to step in and take his place, but a pretty nice pickup that they just announced.
It is. It's funny how you do forget about those guys that are hanging around out on the free agent wire, especially some of these wily veterans that might have been to one or two teams in the last couple of years, but guys who can come in, experienced, give you both a leadership injection and also some healthy competition inside of training camp and win out starting jobs. But here's a guy with 13 touchdowns over his career, almost 2,000 yards, former second-round pick, or still a second-round pick, and never lose that title. But a guy who can come in and help the Falcons and practice with them this afternoon as well, number 81 in your programs.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how they play this thing out. They obviously have some needs at wide receiver. Before we get to back to that again, William Moore was just officially announced by Mike Smith. He's out 2 to 4 weeks, and as a rookie, to say you're going to miss all but one preseason game possibly, that really puts a dent in what they can do with you in year number one, I have to believe.
Coach Smith did address that. He said you never want to see a guy hurt, and he did stress this is nothing major. It was an arthroscopic work on his knee for an injury that occurred a couple days ago here, just a bang up on that knee. But you're right, mentally is where these guys really have to hunker down now because you're not going to get the reps, and it does hurt a rookie. Good news is I actually talked to William Moore before this injury about just that. What are you learning? What is some things that you need to work on? And he said, I know mentally is where it is. That's what I've been focusing on, is in the classroom, because everybody's got talent. So it seems his head's definitely in the right place in terms of what he needs to work on. Now it just expedites that. It makes it a little bit more important when you can't get on the field to get the reps.
Well, I would imagine reps as well, though. If you are not out there to get evaluated in a lot of these preseason games, I would imagine that makes the Falcons maybe change up some of their thinking in regards to the secondary early on in the season.
Perhaps, and it's still a very fluid situation around here anyway. You got to remember the Falcons are in the first week of camp. The first live scrimmage is not until tomorrow night at the All-State Friday Night Lights event at Brookwood High School here in the metro area. So there's still a lot of things to change. No decisions by any means have been made at certain positions outside of maybe Matt Ryan at quarterback, which is what we all chuckle and say that's probably the one block with this team right now. So there's still time. There's a lot of things that could happen. There's a lot of things that could be a lot worse, too, if you look around the league and think about injuries and what other teams have gone through in the past or are going through right now.
We're talking with J. Michael Moore, AtlantaFalcons.com, joining us here on the Afternoon Blitz. And, J. Mike, I don't know how much you can really say on the situation. I don't really want to talk about the contract either, but the fact of the matter is Roddy White is not in camp. How much does that change what the Falcons are doing? I saw Thomas Dimitroff say today, we are progressing with who we have. Is that really the tack they have to take?
It is, and that's what everyone has said from Coach Smith to Thomas Dimitroff, as you talked about. From coaching, it's pretty easy. Coach Smith said you coach the guys who are here. We'd love to have Roddy here, but we're going to keep moving on and coach the guys in camp. With Harry Douglas going down, of course, you can see that things definitely have changed procedurally in terms of just how you operate camp. You go through the morning practice here in Flowery Branch and you have 2 wide receivers than you initially had planned. So there were some different things, guys getting more reps than maybe you want to, because you want to make sure everyone gets a look and you want to make sure the more veteran guys don't get worn out. It's a fine balance when you're going through these hot 2-a-day practices. So procedurally, there are some changes there. Otherwise, Thomas Dimitroff and Mike Smith are right on the money and saying you focus on the guys who are here, and Coach has been very complimentary of Thomas Dimitroff and his staff for really handling that and not, making him overly involved. Coach Smith knows it's taken care of, and he said that repeatedly, and that's the work that's getting done upstairs here.
Do they expect him to be in camp? I mean, obviously he's getting fined, but do they expect him to be at camp here in the near future?
Publicly, the team hasn't really commented on any sort of expectations in terms of when Roddy is expected in camp or when they think he will be. And I think that is, again, just kind of signifying the fluid situation of any NFL training camp, that you can have an injury, you could have some guys start to stand out, some guys you thought you might stand out might fall off the radar. Just being really open-minded in a lot of the situations, and especially with the contract talk and stuff like that, you have to be open-minded, and that's what the approach they're taking.
Talking with J. Michael Moore, AtlantaFalcons.com. Over on the other side of the ball, to me, that's where a lot of the intrigue is, because there's a lot of unknown. Has anybody stood out early on defense as far as trying to step up and earn some playing time?
I'll tell you, the guy who's really stood out to me and to a couple other reporters watching practice isn't necessarily an unknown guy. You've heard his name, and that's Brent Grimes, the third-year cornerback out of Shippensburg University in Pittsburgh. Here's a guy who's 5'9", which I think may be a bit of an exaggeration when I'm standing next to him, but undersized, but incredibly athletic. He can jump and make himself almost 7 foot tall, 8 foot tall, it seems like, with his leaping ability. So he makes up for things with that. Again, Coach Smith has called him the most athletic player on the team, and it seems like he is starting to maybe put some things together. He started the first 4 or 5 games last year before an injury opened the door for Dominique Foxworth. So he has some starting experience. Coaching staff really likes how athletic he is, and he's showing it in camp, and he's stringing it together for 2, 3, 4 days. So that's a guy to keep your eye on opposite Chris Houston in that battle for cornerback, which you and I have talked about, it seems like all through the offseason, just what's going to happen there on the defense.
And I guess with some of with the rookies, you may not really get a better read on them until you get to a preseason game or two.
Correct, especially at certain positions. I think defensive line is one where Coach Smith has talked about Vance Walker and talked about Pere Jerry. He likes what he has there, especially Pere Jerry. You watch this guy and you say, hey, he's so explosive. But things change when you get into a preseason game and you're in pads. So that's a position that you unfortunately have to wait a few more days before you maybe really see what you have. Linebackers have looked very good. Curtis Lofton's been sidelined with an injury, so that's a bit of possible concern. And in the secondary, Thomas DeCoux looking very good, and Brent Grimes, as I mentioned, and Christopher Owens, a guy, rookie out of San Jose State, third-round pick. A lot of people didn't know who this guy was coming out of college, but he's shown speed and aggressiveness to make up for his lack of size as well. Knock on him was that he was too small, but he's very, very fast, and he's not afraid to mix it up with people either.
And being familiar with what Mike Smith did in Jacksonville, that's the aspect of the defense I'm interested in seeing, is the aggressive, physical side of the defense. Is that really more of that coming out, what the coaches feel is going to take to move them into an upper half of the league defense?
It is, and I can't remember if I was speaking with you or someone else about all these things that Coach Smith and Thomas Dimitroff and some of the coordinators have said about what they want. They want young. They want fly to the ball. They want aggressiveness. They want all of these different things, and they've said that's what they're shooting for. Well, they were telling the truth. That's exactly what they got. And even though you haven't been in pads for long, and when you are pads, the guys aren't taking each other to the ground. There's no live tackling or anything like that. The speed factor on the defense has increased. The chatter factor on the defense has increased. I call that the chatter factor, how much they're talking, how much they speak to each other, how much trash they talk to the other side. And then even though you're not, again, taking people all the way to the ground, they're around the ball, and the pads are clacking when they're there. They're mixing it up out there, and that's, again, what Coach Smith wanted, and that's what we're starting to see the makings of.
Well, I liken it to two different styles. Last year I thought they were a bend but don't break defense. Will they be able to be a more in-your-face type defense like we've seen in Jacksonville in the past, like we've seen with teams like Pittsburgh and the Ravens on defense?
If they stay healthy, yes, and given some time, yes. I think everyone's a little not pessimistic, but just want to keep an arm's reach and say this is a young defense. They're going to have their growing pains. But I said the other day, talking to Wes Durham, the voice of the Falcons, we were just chatting about the defense. Like, if you can get through the first 3 games of the season, you get a bye week. And then if you can maybe get through the next couple, so 5, 6 games in the season, if you can get through that, this defense is going to really start mature, and they're going to start to mature quickly, and they're not going to be that bend but don't break defense. And that's a good way to put the defense from last year. There were a lot of veterans. There were a lot of guys maybe playing out of position, and the coaching staff in their first year had to kind of tweak some things and put some Band-Aids on. And it was a remarkable job considering all the different things there. This year, there's some of the guys in place that Smitty likes, and given some time to mature and gel together, they are going to start being pretty aggressive.